Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, October 5th, and this is your agenda for today. We are going to review memory moments. This is another notice and note strategy you can find on your bookmark. And then we are going to read and annotate chapter 2. And for homework, you will read and annotate chapter 2.5. And then you will complete a discussion post on Schoology. So first, memory moments. Before we review this, you will need a copy of your Honest Truth book, so make sure you have your book and that you have your bookmark. And on your bookmark, find the memory moment. This is a reading strategy when you're reading and the author interrupts the action to flash back to the past and tell you a memory. You should ask yourself, why might this memory be important? The answers will tell you about the theme, conflict, or might foreshadow what will happen later in the story. So memory moments are moments when the author interrupts the action to flash back to the past. For annotating today, you need your pencil and a highlighter. You are going to watch this video for annotations. And we're going to look for memory moments, aha moments, and sensory language. If at any point I'm going too fast, you are welcome to pause the video, write your annotations, and then continue on. And we are on chapter 2. You'll notice at the bottom the miles to go has updated, and that is because Mark has been traveling on the train. So now it's miles to go 115. I got off the train around 9 o'clock, alone in Seattle with a whole dark night to get through. It was raining. We have a bit of setting here, so we know when and where, 9 o'clock in Seattle. Once I got out of the bus station, I set the duffel down and unzipped it. Bo came bounding out, his claws clattering on the wet sidewalk. His whole body was wagging. We got a long night ahead of us, Beauchamp. I scratched him behind the ears and slapped his ribs. Our bus doesn't leave till tomorrow. There's a lot of time to kill. I slipped the backpack on. Bo scampered around, sniffing the strange city smells and going to the bathroom everywhere. Then we started walking. The city was dark. It wasn't bright lights, lit up buildings, cars, and people walking around like I'd imagined. The train station in Seattle was in the middle of empty warehouses and abandoned buildings. The streetlights were broken, mostly. The only people I saw looked homeless, curled up in doorways or coughing from the darkness of alleys. Bo growled at them and walked closer to my leg. Everything smelled like old cars and garbage. In an hour, I saw only a couple of cars go by. When I glimpsed the flash of their headlights and heard their tires crunching on the street, I ducked into whatever deep shadow I could find and tried to hold my breath. I gripped Bo's collar tight and whispered in his ear to calm him. The cops could be after me already. As we passed a dumpster, a crash sounded from the darkness behind it. A loud metal crash like a garbage can getting knocked over. I screamed and jumped, my heart hammering. This is another example of sensory language, and it is sound. It's a loud metal crash. I almost dropped the empty duffel bag. Bo barked and the fur on his back raised. I almost started to run, but there was nowhere to run. There was a rustling sound in the darkness, like someone or something trying to get up, a scraping. Bo growled low and deep in his throat and backed up, his eyes on the noise. Come on, I said, and my voice was shaking. We kept walking faster. I looked back over my shoulder. Bo did too, but whatever it was never left the shadows. Block by block, my legs got shakier. My stomach started getting wobbly, and I kept swallowing spit. The little pain in my head got sharper. The backpack straps dug into my shoulders. I was too tired. I needed to rest. I needed to eat. Bo wasn't wagging his tail anymore. His head turned back and forth, sniffing at every strange sound and looking at every black shadow. A growl lived down in his throat all the time. Everything felt like danger. Ahead, I saw the glowing windows of an all-night restaurant. It was a crappy place, the kind that has plastic ashtrays on the tables and serves breakfast all day. I felt the little bulge of money in my pants pocket. I didn't have extra, but I had just enough. I dropped the duffel and spread it open. "Come on, buddy." I patted the bag. My words came between panting breaths. Bo's ears went back and his doggy eyebrows scrunched together. He whined and wagged his tail low. "I know," I said. "It sucks, but I'll get you some bacon." His ears perked up at the word. He tapped his toes a couple of times on the sidewalk and then stepped forward and curled up in the duffel. I scratched behind his ears before zipping him up. My hands felt weak, like I couldn't make a fist, but I managed to lift the duffel. I looked at the darkness around me and walked into the restaurant. Oopsies. Come here, baby. The place smelled like stale cigarettes and coffee and frying eggs. Pictures flashed on a TV hanging in the corner, but the sound was off. My mouth started to water and my stomach woke up. Most of the tables were empty. There was an old couple chewing without talking at a corner booth and a man with a long beard and ponytail sitting by himself at the counter. I wondered if he was homeless. A gum-chewing waitress was leaning against the counter watching the TV. Everyone seemed tired and unhappy. The waitress looked me up and down. "Just you?" she asked. Her voice was scratchy and rough. I nodded. "Pick any table you want, honey." I slid Bo and his duffel into a booth and sat beside him. I left one hand on him and kept him still and opened a plastic menu with the other. I kept my backpack resting against my leg under the table. The city didn't feel safe. I was so tired the words on the menu blurred in my eyes. "It's almost 11 o'clock. The waitress's voice in my ear made me jump. Her eyes glared questions at me. Through her caked-on makeup, I could see the shadow of a black eye. Her mouth never stopped working on her gum. I blinked fast and nodded. The chewing stopped. "So?" She raised her eyebrows and dropped her chin to look at me. "What you doing out by yourself so late?" My brain fumbled around for a good lie, but it was too tired. Everything slipped between its fingers. Okay, guys, this is another example of figurative language, saying that the brain has fingers. That's the example of personification. "I'm not alone. My dad's, out there." I nodded my head toward the window. The waitress squinted out into the darkness. Up the street, a neon sign glowed. "What, at Barney's?" She rolled her eyes and shook her head. 11 at night and the guy's at a bar and his kids eating at a diner. That's real sweet. Sounds like my dad. She looked down at me and her eyes were softer. Her teeth started in again on the gum. "What you want to eat, honey?" "Toast and scrambled eggs." I remembered Bo beneath my arm lying in the darkness of the duffel. "And a side order of bacon, please." The corner of the waitress's mouth curled up for just a second in what was probably supposed to be a smile. "You got it." My stomach growled and flopped while I waited. It was empty, but it wasn't exactly hungry. I was used to the feeling. The ache in my head had grown. It stabbed at my skull. I squinted my eyes against the pain, then reached into my coat pocket. My fingers closed around the plastic prescription bottle. I clenched my teeth, then pulled it out and opened it and rattled 3 of the pills into my hand. I got all 3 down with one gulp of ice water. I was a pro. I knew they'd make my head feel better, but I hated the pills. I slipped my hand inside the duffel to scratch Bo's ears. His soft and warm tongue licked my palm. He was such a good dog. Zipped it up in my duffel bag, smelling food with an empty stomach, and he licks my palm. Tears burned uninvited into my eyes. Bo's love somehow stirred up all my sunken sadness. I bit my lip and looked out the window into the darkness and tried to remember the last time I'd been happy. I had to go back, way back. Every memory for years was stained now, even the good ones. I had to go all the way back to before. It was summer, 7 years ago. I was 5. This is going to start our memory moment We're not going to highlight the whole memory moment because that would be too long. So we're going to annotate where the memory moment starts, and then we'll annotate where it ends. Okay, sorry for all the background noise. My kiddos are getting ready for school, and my little one is sick, so you'll probably hear her coughing in the background. Jess was over at my house, and we were playing in the backyard with Bo. He was just a puppy then, small and yippy and always tripping over his paws. I felt good, better. I didn't have a headache or anything. We were running through the sprinkler. All the world was green grass and blue skies and shoulders hot with sunshine. We didn't have to have a reason to laugh. Little kids are so dumb. They don't know anything yet. That's the truth. My mom was on the back porch sipping a glass of lemonade and watching us, a smile on her face. I wonder if it was her last happy memory too. We lay down on the wet grass to catch our breath. We giggled and looked at the clouds. We compared belly buttons. Mine was an outie, pale and white. Jess's was an innie, a little crater in a light brown skin. Bo flopped down happily between us, filling our noses with the smell of wet dog. Sensory language. This is smell. Look, Jess had said, propping herself up on one elbow. Bo's kinda us put together. I giggled. No, really, see? She poked her fingers in his hair. He's got 2 colors of fur. Brown like your hair and black like mine. Yeah, I'd said. I'd had shaggy brown hair. Sitting in the restaurant, I'd slid my hand up under my hat and felt my head. All right, this is going to be an important aha moment for us because we are realizing something important about Mark here. He's saying that he'd had shaggy brown hair, and in present day, he's lifting his hand up under his hat to feel his head. So think about why he would do that in this moment. And his eyes, she'd continued. One green, she said, pointing at it closely with a chewed fingernail. Bo squinted and turned his head away from her finger. Like yours. And one brown, she finished, trying to point at his other eye. Like mine. I liked that idea. I liked it a lot. I'd laughed out loud. I liked it so much. He's like both of us, I said through a summer smile. Together. But at that moment the phone rang. My mom jumped up to answer it fast. I watched her go inside. I watched through the window as she picked up the phone and held it to her ear. I looked down at my belly button and the shimmering crystal of water pooled there. You think that's my mama calling? Jess asked, sitting all the way up and looking at my mom. No, I'd answered, still looking down at my belly button. I reached out and petted my new puppy, scratched behind his ears and under his chin. He closed his eyes happily. He really seemed to like being scratched behind his ears. He was my dog. God, I already loved him so much. I saw out of the corner of my eyes Jess's body stiffen. Oh, she said. Mark, why is your mom crying? And that's where my happy memory stopped. So this is going to be the end of our memory moment. I thought of Jessie back home. She probably knew by now. She probably figured out where I was going. She probably figured out why. For some reason, that made me feel a little better. Like Bo and I weren't all alone. I pictured her brown eyes, how serious and deep they were. How she could look right into me in her quiet way and make me feel better. I closed my eyes for a moment and tried to feel her. There she was. I smiled, just a little to myself. That's the kind of friend she was. We were so together that we weren't ever really apart. I pulled out the notebook out of my backpack and started writing without thinking, stopping only for a second to count and make sure. Across far, dark miles, a friend can still hold your hand and be there with you. This is another haiku poem. And remember, these poems are going to give us insight into what Mark is feeling. So he is thinking about his friend Jessie and how she can still be there for him even though they're far apart in this moment. I read it over, then nodded. It worked. The thought of Jess made me feel better, but I couldn't shake the memory of my mom crying. I knew she was probably crying right at that moment. My dad, too. Maybe. I'd seen way too much of them crying. That's the truth. My breath started shaking, and I gritted my teeth, pushing their faces away from my mind. Thinking of them wouldn't do me any good. The waitress bumped out of the kitchen with a plate of food. "Sorry, Willie, it ain't for you," I heard her say to the homeless-looking guy at the counter. "Earl says you gotta have money for food. You're lucky I'm giving you the coffee." She slouched over to where I sat. "Here you go, honey." She slid the plate in front of me. The eggs didn't look anything like the way my mom made them. The crust hadn't been taken off the toast like she did either. "You gonna take your hat off and stay a while?" I looked up at her and her smacking lips. I wanted to yank the gum out of her mouth and throw it across the room. "No." She shrugged. "Suit yourself, sweetheart," she said through her gum and walked away. With a quick look around, I grabbed the bacon and slipped it into the duffel bag. Bo's tongue slapped it out of my hand with hungry licks. I coughed to cover the slurping noises. I got both pieces of toast down and still felt okay. I swallowed and looked at the runny eggs and tried to pretend they looked good. I needed to eat. The first rubbery bite stuck in my throat, but I got it down. The second bite went down easier, but my stomach started to twitch and wiggle. I was chewing on the third bite when I saw what was on the TV. At the top of the screen were the words "Breaking News." Beneath that was a map of the state of Washington, with a blinking red dot right in the middle marked Wenatchee, where I'd run from. At the bottom of the screen in bold yellow letters it said, "Missing Child Alert." My jaw stopped in mid-bite. My stomach clenched like a punching fist. As I watched, they highlighted a wiggly line on the map. The line snaked from the red dot of Wenatchee to a new red dot labeled Spokane. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. My trick had worked. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this. And this is going to be an aha moment for Mark. So this missing child alert on the news station is about him, and he's realizing that his trick to the police had worked, because now they think that he is in Spokane. My smile dropped, though, at what came at the screen next. At the top of the screen was my name. At the bottom of the screen was a phone number. In the middle of the screen, taking up the whole TV, was a picture of me. It was my school picture. My red hat was on my head, and I was grinning a big, stupid smile. I hated that picture. My eyes darted to the other people in the restaurant. No one was looking at the TV. I tried to swallow my bite of egg, but it stuck in my mouth. I felt sick. My eyes flashed back and forth between the TV and the other customers. "Don't look up," I prayed. My own smiling face on the TV teased me. "You can't get away," it seemed to say. I ignored it and waited for the image to change. Come on, I whispered. How long were they going to keep my picture up? Wasn't anything more important happening than some dumb kid running away? The waitress walked out of the swinging door from the kitchen, a pot of coffee in her hand. She smacked her gum and walked over to the counter. She was facing right at the TV and my dorky school picture. I held my breath. She then started counting the money from her apron pocket. The TV was right above her head. I was frozen, hardly breathing, with my mouth stuck open and my stomach flopping like a fish in the bottom of a boat. She looked up from her money and saw me. I couldn't help it. My eyes flickered up to my picture behind her. She stopped chewing her gum and turned her head to look. My stomach caved in. Okay, this moment, his stomach flopping around like a fish in the bottom of a boat. This is a great simile. If you hear growling in the background, that is my dog, Wally. Just as her head made it all the way around, the picture changed back to the map. It still said "Missing Child Alert" on the screen, but my face was finally gone. I stared breathless at the back of the waitress's head. Had the picture changed before she'd seen it? My fist strangled the empty fork in my hand. The waitress turned back to me and cocked an eyebrow. She put her money away and walked over to me, her gum smacking in her mouth. She put one hand on her hip and looked at me. Missing kid, huh? She leaned down a bit and lowered her voice. Tell the truth, honey. Did that scare you? I looked up at her, mouth still open, unable to speak. All my plans were going to go up in smoke the first night over a plate of runny eggs. Well, she went on, don't let it. There's more good folks than bad in the world, believe it or not. I bet they find him. She winked at me, and I tried desperately to smile. She hadn't seen. I know it's tough, she added with a roll of her eyes out the window toward the neon bar sign. Having a daddy who ain't really looking out for you. She reached down and patted my hand. He don't know what he's missing out on, sweetie, and you're gonna be just fine. My dad was a bum, and I turned out all right. She turned and walked away, and I finally started to breathe again. She didn't suspect a thing. I shook my head and took a shaky breath. People can be so blind. That's the truth. The phone number was still on the TV below the map. I grabbed my pen and wrote it on a napkin and shoved it in my pocket. I noticed the map had changed. Now, after the word Spokane, there was a question mark. There were more dots that appeared on the red wiggly line between Wenatchee and Spokane. They were labeled Quincy, Moses Lake, and Ritzville. Of course, the bus had shown up in Spokane by now, and I wasn't on it, so they figured I must have gotten off at one of the stops in between. They were still off my trail. Okay, so this is an aha moment as well. The police officers realizing that Mark didn't end up in Spokane, but that he might be on one of the stops between there. Oopsies. And Mark realizing that they are still off his trail. As I closed my notebook, the nausea hit me. A green rolling wave of sickness that started deep in my belly and rose up toward my throat. I grabbed the edge of the table with both hands, trying to write it out. So this description of his nausea is also sensory language. So we have sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. It's not necessarily touch, but it's like how you feel. It was no use. I knew the feeling too well. My mouth went dry, then filled with spit, then went sour. I jumped up and ran for the bathroom. I saw the waitress watch me from across the restaurant. I barely made it. I planted my knees in front of the toilet just as my eggs and toast came back up. I tried to be quiet, but there's only so much you can do. My stomach heaved, and I lost all the food I'd managed to choke down. My eyes watered and my hands shook. The floor was filthy. The toilet was already disgusting before I got there, and it wasn't getting any prettier. Between heaves, I spit and tried to breathe through my mouth and read all the dirty words scratched on the chipped metal walls of the bathroom stall. I thought of Hungry Willie at the bar and me puking up dinner. Life sucks. That's the truth. Here's what I don't get. Why does everyone always try to pretend that it doesn't? I rinsed my mouth in the sink and hurried back to my table. Bo, thank God, was still in the duffel. I had been afraid he'd try to come and find me. I scratched him quick behind his ears and was zipping the duffel bag closed when the waitress came up behind me. You okay, honey? Do you want some 7-Up or something? Her voice was all sweet and worried, like a mom's. It only made me madder. No, I said without looking at her. I just need to pay. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wad of cash. Are you sure? I could get you some more toast or go get your dad or... I'm fine, I snapped. And this time I looked at her. I could feel the anger in my eyebrows. Her eyes widened in surprise. My dad gave me money for the food. Just give me the bill so I can go. You know what, honey? Don't worry about it. Keep the money and don't tell your dad. Maybe it'll be helpful later. I don't need your help. I'm fine. I just need to pay and go. Tell me how much. My voice sounded angrier than I wanted, but my stomach was still gurgling and my legs were weak, and the smell of coffee and bacon was making me feel worse, and Bo was still stuck in the duffel. I wanted to get outside into the darkness so I could hug my dog and smell nothing except his fur. I wanted to get away from the TV. smells here, so that's more sensory language. The waitress snapped her gum a few times and nodded. It's $8. I pulled a 10 and a 20 out of my handful of bills and dropped them on the table. That's enough for mine, I said, and for whatever Willie wants. The world was starting to spin again, and the taste of throw up in my mouth wasn't making me feel any better. I shoved my notebook and pen into my backpack, grabbed Bo's duffel, and brushed past the waitress toward the door. I swallowed and breathed tight little breaths to keep from puking again. The waitress followed me to the door. You're an angry kid, she said to my back as I pushed the door open, but maybe you got reasons. Maybe I do, I answered, and the door closed behind me. Outside in the darkness, the cool air cleared my head. My stomach started to settle down, but I was still mad. Mad at the TV, mad at the stomach, mad at the waitress. I wasn't even sure why. I walked out to the edge of the parking lot to the end, where the light from the windows reached. I counted my stack of hard-saved money one more time, then slipped it back into my pocket. I turned around and looked at the restaurant. Dribbles of rain sprinkled down onto my neck. Somewhere, not too far away in the darkness, a car alarm started screaming. That is good figurative language as well. For sound. The restaurant looked warm and cheerful, its yellow light spilling out like running egg yolk into the darkness. It looked safe, a place to come in from the cold. I could see the waitress clearing the dishes from my table, talking over her shoulder to the old couple. It was a place with sound and people, a place where life just kept going on. I hated it. I was standing outside, weak and tasting like vomit, alone again. I lifted the camera from around my neck, framed the lighted windows of the restaurant right in the middle with the night's blackness all around, and snapped a picture. I didn't see the gang of guys watching me from the shadows. When I turned and walked away from the litter and broken glass of the empty middle-of-the-night street, they were following close behind. All right, so he is taking another photo here of the diner. And remember, we're annotating anytime he takes a photo because these are important moments for Mark. We have to think about, why is he taking a picture of this specific moment? What is important about this diner that he chose to take a picture? We also have this description of the restaurant. The yellow light spilling out like runny egg yolk into the darkness. That's a great simile and also a good sensory language for sight. So we have this foreshadowing at the end of this chapter where it seems like something bad might happen with these gang of guys following him in the middle of the night. You are going to read the half chapter next. It's only a page. You are not reading ahead because we will read chapter 3 in class together. And when you are done reading the half chapter, you have a discussion board to work on. Sorry, y'all. She's not happy. Okay, so in your discussion board, you are finding one example of sensory language from The Honest Truth. Identify the type of sensory language. Is it sight? Is it taste? Is it sound? Is it touch? Or is it smell? Provide the text evidence and explain why you believe this is sensory language. You can look at the example in the parentheses to help you. Bo flopped down happily between us, filling our noses with the smell of wet dog. Geeman Heart 20. It has the quotation marks, the author's last name and page number in parentheses. This is an example of smell sensory language because it talks about the smell filling their noses. So everyone's going to choose an example of sensory language that we annotated from the book, and you will put it there. And that is all for today. Have a great day, guys, and hopefully I'll see y'all tomorrow if this baby girl is feeling better.